With set 13 releasing in Japan, there's been quite a bit of arguments about you don't get to play the game. The game is too fast, it is too aggressive, games end on turn 4 or 5, and people are overall pretty upset because they want to play more Vanguard, right? They want to have many turns to play, and they want to feel that their decisions are rewarded. And we've made a similar video about this before, but I want to delve into this aggression game plan or perspective a little bit more as well. So what's interesting to me is that, people are saying it's like, the set 13 decks are too fast and games end too quickly, right? Which I think is relatively true. Overall, the game is pretty fast. But I think there's a bit of nuance on whether that's necessarily a bad thing or not, because it's interesting to me that it became such a big deal in the Vanguard community that this phenomenon has actually occurred. Because when you look at other card games, Aggro is a playstyle that exists in virtually any mana-based card game. So you take a look at Magic, right? Red is basically all that it's known for is aggression, winning games before your opponent can get to do their things. And there's always this kind of like flowchart, right? Where it's like aggro beats control because control takes a while to get there, and then control beats mid-range because mid-range doesn't aggress as much, so control can get to its game plan, whereas mid-range can answer aggro, therefore it beats aggro usually. So you have this flowchart in a lot of different games. And the whole point of control decks is we're not going to let you play the game because we're going to deny you from doing what you want to do, but in the long term. And then mid-range decks are kind of like they get to play the game throughout the long term, but they don't take too long to the extent that the control decks do. And then aggro decks are really fast. They just want to go and win as quickly as possible. They just want to like thin down your life as quickly as possible, so they just win the game before it gets set up and get to do your thing. So when you look at other card games, I'm going to give the example of Shadowverse Evolve, is that you have this flowchart in Shadowverse Evolve. It's really, really common, where aggro decks are really, really fast, so decks that can deal with aggro will just lose. But then mid-range decks that can't really close out the game fast enough will lose to control decks because they cannot keep up with like how big the late game is of control decks / they get denied of their plays. So now, you think about it, it's like aggro exists in everything, right? Aggro exists on a lot of these different card games. And the whole point is that aggro doesn't let you play the game. It wants to end the game before you get to do the big things as a non-aggro deck. And so it forces you into misplays, it forces you into playing weird, it forces you into making decisions you otherwise wouldn't, and your deck doesn't want to do this, but you have to make those decisions to stay alive. So, aggro exists, but for some reason, if aggro exists in Vanguard, it's the worst. It is very bad. We cannot be having aggro in Vanguard. It is the worst. It's not good. Games end too fast. And so I was just very curious, like, why is this becoming such a big deal? We even had one of the top Japanese players tweet about this, talking about the phenomenon too. So he posted this picture of Shion where he says, "Boku wa kyou kagiri de Vanguard o yameru." So it's like, starting from today, I quit Vanguard. So he says in his tweet that going first is too strong, and if you go second, you basically know that you will not have a fifth turn. And if your opponent gets lucky and like hits 2 crits in the early game, you probably don't have a 4th turn either going second. So I think about this line every single day. And, so it's like basically he's not happy that the game is sped up so much that going second, even if you have a turn 4 is a question mark, right? Because your opponent going first turn 5 will just blow you up, right? Or turn 4 going first even. So the game is just sped up so much that a lot of players are not very happy about it. But this was basically posted on the very early, this was like 2 days after the set came out. But there's been a lot of nuance added to this as well, where it's like, okay, but is it truly the case? Is it really just aggro decks that are taking up everything? I mean, there's so much in that set that is it really all that? And so of course we had Miltai post up this interesting flowchart where we have 3 different types of decks that go in a flowchart and beat each other. And so he says that these decks are decks that go so quickly that before your opponent can really do what they want, they win. So basically what we described as aggro decks. I think that Vanguard does not have the concept of control very often. There's a few decks that have nailed it, like Glendios or Yotsuba, where they prevent you from playing the game and achieve an alternate win con, or like sometimes Prison, I guess, or Eva was somewhat there maybe too, but overall, in Vanguard, it's more about how fast the deck goes. Is it slow, medium speed, or very fast, right? So these fast decks win before your opponent wants to do anything, and so they are paired well into these decks, such as Leonard and Jeweled, that have very high card specs, which means that each card does a lot, but they take until turn 4 to access those high card specs, those high abilities of power output, right? And so this tweet was posted a bit later. This was October 3rd, whereas the set came out on September 29th. So, you know, he says these aggro decks, they beat these turn 4 decks. And these turn 4 decks, they have higher card specs than these overall well-rounded mid-speed decks. So these are the mid-rangier decks, right? So they get beat by the high card spec decks because these decks, they will overpower these decks in the late game. However, these mid-speed decks, they can keep up with the aggression from the top aggro decks, and they can shut them down before their aggro gets out of control. So, because these decks, their power spike is on turn 3. These decks, their power spike can be as early as turn 2 because of how well they can rush. Like my Go can do 4 attacks on turn 2 technically. But these decks, they need to get to turn 4. So therefore, the fast decks beat the turn 4 decks. The turn 4 decks beat the turn 3 decks because they overpower them into the late game. But the turn 3 decks can beat the turn 2 decks because they can keep up with the aggression and come back with a bigger punch than what the turn 2 decks can do. And so therefore, it's like, okay, the game has sped up, but there is still nuance. There's still this interesting relationship between decks going on, and that it's not all just go fast and win quick. There is a lot more that gets into it. And then we had Sasurai, who added another chart that kind of adds more. It's a little bit less organized, I would say, so it's a bit harder to really bring down. But the red arrows mean that this has an advantage too. Blue arrow means has a disadvantage too. So basically, the new lyrical ride line, the Medusa, who in my opinion is like beautiful card design, finally defensive card design, really, really cool. And essentially this one, she is well versed, you know, good matchup into the turn 4 decks. And so the turn 4 decks have a hard time against the Shianna. But then we can see here that we have so this one, we have Shianna. These are decks that really pop off on turn 4. These are decks that pop off on turn 3. And these are decks that already are very strong prior to turn 3. So these are more aggressive decks. So, you know, and this isn't just, don't look at just these decks as the only ones that exist here. These are examples chosen to represent these categories. So here, these are both decks that pop off on turn 3, but there are more decks as part of this category, such as Bastion, for example, too. And these are more aggressive decks, but there's more to it than just Jet and Minerva. I would even argue that Minerva is not the best example of this either. So, for example, here, you can see that, you know, these aggro decks are well paired as a matchup against Gorgons, but Gorgons Gorgons are not very good against this, but they're good into the late game decks, right? And then even between the turn 3 decks is like, Youthberg can beat up Shianna because of the big power increase that kind of denies her effects. But then we have a tough time as Jiva players into the Gorgon deck because of, you know, the mechanics of the Gorgon deck, right? So there's a lot more harder to read, but you can see there's a lot more nuance. There's a lot more to the format than you would think than just saying, it's all fast, it's all aggro, nothing matters, I lose on turn 4. It's like, that's just how the game is right now. And there's a lot you can get out of it too. And I think, you know, to end this video, I want to give you a reminder that not everything you read and see on the internet has to be how you feel. Just because your favorite influencer or your favorite player says something, that doesn't mean that you have to feel that way, or, you know, that has to represent how everyone feels. That is them putting out their own thoughts into the forefront, into the fray, and whether you agree or not, maybe they just want to stimulate discussion as well. I had this case where Set 13 came out and I had no time to play it on the release weekend because I was too busy with Shadowverse Evolve. And because of that, I kept seeing tweets. I kept seeing everyone go like, Set 13 is too fast, this format sucks, it's gonna be horrible, I'm so concerned, I'm so concerned. And without even playing it, part of me was starting to get sucked into the narrative. I was starting to get really pushed into the narrative. It's like, oh my, wait, maybe it is too fast. Like, oh my god, I'm just approaching it. I'm like, these thoughts are just going into my brain. It's too powerful. But then I spent 2 days playing the Set 13 format and going, it's actually really fun. This is like, it's different. It's faster. But it's also interesting where Set 12 was a fast format, but very enjoyable. Set 13 is a fast format, but somehow it's actually really enjoyable. and there's a lot more nuance to it because of these flowcharts and stuff that I've been showing you to. So I think that before you base your opinions and kind of like jump on the bandwagons on Twitter or X or whatever social platform you prefer, give things a try. Give things a try and really think, like, step aside from the internet for a second and think, how do I feel about this? Is you know, my favorite influencer, XXX Dark Lord Blaster Dark Omega Man plus 27 truly correct? Or maybe there's a bit more going on here than what Dark Lord is saying on Twitter. So I just think, you know, just think about it for a second. But hope you like this video, just kind of breaking things down about this current format. I personally enjoy it quite a bit. I do think there's problems in that there's less defensive mechanics than there should be, that we've brought out quite a lot. Sorry, DF, you're cooked. Leffen said Vanguard sucks. Damn, I can't believe it. It's over. It's over. But I think that there's definitely quite a lot more nuance to the arguments than you think, and I do recommend that we take things one step at a time. And, you know, I do think that while we need more defensive mechanics, I think designs like Shiana and stuff like the carbuncles being like emergency 20k shields is good card design. And I hope that they continue to print good cards in decks that can be used in your main phase that just have extra shields slapped onto them. Like Eruminia is had so many new support cards that are just like plus 5k shield for no reason. Keep doing that. I like that a lot. I think that's a very, very good idea. But anyway, I think that yeah, editor Chris put defensive roar in here. Yeah, that's right. That good Dragon Empire Blitz order. Put that in every single nation. We like that quite a lot. But anyway, I think that's all I really want to talk about in this topic. Let me know your thoughts as well. What you feel about these faster formats. Where do you situate yourself in this argument? And hopefully, you know, we can add more to this, right? I like these flowcharts. I like this whole discussion. For some people, it really is just like the annoyance of a fast format. And like some people just don't like playing these fast formats and they just go play other games or other formats. And that's completely fine too. But for those of us that do want to just challenge the game as it evolves, I think it's pretty fun. And overall, this is looking to be a pretty interesting format. I'll talk a little bit more about early results in a different video too, because there's quite a lot to unpack in that front. But anyway, that's it for this video. If you liked it, give it a like. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. You want some bonus content, YouTube channel memberships are right there for you as well. But with that, that's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.